Hi, I'm Guy Berry with Optimistic American, and this is our book club. Today, we're going to talk about The Goal from Eli Goldratt. This book has been around for 20, 30 years. I hope you enjoy it. My guest is John Love, the owner of JLO Management. John, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We, for this book, read The Goal, which has been around, I think, since the 80s. And for any person who is listening or watching this podcast, would you describe it as a business book?
I would definitely describe it as a business book. For me, what I thought it was about creating an integrated system so you could achieve your dream outcome with less effort and less time. That's how I would summarize what it was about.
I'm sure anybody who reads this book would just say those exact same words. So, if you were to give a suggestion, though, would you suggest people to read or listen to the book?
I think that you should definitely read it because the audiobook was different than normal audiobooks. It was more of like...
So read it or listen?
Listen.
Okay, listen.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. All right.
Listen to the audiobook for sure because it's almost like you have a movie on, but you have your eyes closed.
Yep.
You hear all the scenery and environment and everything that's going on. So it's not your typical audiobook. It's very good. It's a very good listen.
There's a part of the book in the audio where literally there's a helicopter sound. The main character is freaking out and he's running from office to office and you can hear him closing doors, opening doors, screaming to people. Yeah. And you're caught up in the story. You're like, so I found the audio really fun to listen to. And for those who are newer to business books, this is a great intro business book because you're getting a story, right? You're getting a fiction story that has business concepts inside it. So tell me about Alex, the main character. What do you think about him?
Yeah, so firstly, I think if you're reading this, this is really meant for owners and managers who want to move their organization forward in a holistic manner. It's definitely about systems thinking. Alex is a plant manager at a factory. They produce products, and he's in a situation where his plant is kind of in the eyeballs of the upper management. They're not performing well. They're not profitable. And they have a lot of processes that have been recently implemented that were meant for increasing efficiencies. And all that did when they were implemented was that while they were being more efficient, the plant got less and less profitable. So the scenery is that they're evaluating whether they should close the plant.
Right. So you got Bill Peach, the regional manager or vice president or whatever, his boss, telling him, we're shutting the plant down.
Yeah, you have 3 months.
You got 3 months. You got to figure this out. And then the story follows Alex through this. We won't touch much on it for this unless you would like to, but there is a part of the story that is how he's dealing with his personal life, with his wife and his kids, and how he gets through that. And there is some learning there. There is some just how to get through that relationship advice, maybe a little bit there. But that is a subsection of this book, meaning like a sub-story within it, is how he deals with losing a plant and trying to figure out how to make it survive while helping his marriage survive and being a dad to his kids, right? So there's a lot to this story. It's not just business concepts.
How I interpreted it was that while it was a business book, it was also about systems thinking, and they're looking at not just the plant as a system, but they're looking at Alex's life like a system.
Yep.
And he's got business, he's got personal, he's got a wife, he's got kids, he's got other things happening. But the way that his business impacts him and he impacts his business affects how his family life goes and how much time he has to spend with his family. So I took that connection of the systems thinking throughout the book.
That's right. Okay. Most important question. What is the goal?
The goal. It's definitely the most important thing to define.
Okay.
In Alex's scenario, they defined it as making money. They have a
right.
company, they have a plant, and the goal is to make money.
And couldn't the argument be made that any business needs to make money?
I think so. If you don't have money, you're not profitable, your situation is that you're default dead, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to live to see another day. And that also means that there's employees that aren't going to get paid. They're not making a living for their family. It has a lot of impacts. So it also means if you're not making money, even though if you're surviving because you have cash in the bank, you're not able to reinvest and grow the business and have a bigger future.
Right. And so when he's talking about the goal, which is to make money, and they start to simplify it, do you recall do you have the notes or the three concepts around what those pieces are to making money?
Yeah, so they started by defining that goal, and the next important component to look into was to make sure everyone was rowing in the right direction. So they defined the goal as, number one, profit, bottom line on the P&L. Are you making money? Does the owner get to take money home, or do they have money to reinvest in the business? Number two was cash flow. That's really about managing your working capital, making sure that the AR and the AP is balanced so that you have cash to maintain the business. A lot of owners forget about that timing piece, and that can really get you if you're not looking at it. And then the third piece was return on equity, and that was just important because if you put in $1 million or $1 billion and you're only making $1 million, that's like less than a 1% return, not a great use of capital. So return on equity was super important too.
Right. And those all tie together to this aspect of you got to make money, right? And they introduced this concept of throughput that matters. Can you describe a little bit of how you read or view the throughput that matters?
Yeah, the throughput was really, they looked at it as how is the system generating money? Like, what is it doing to generate money? You have to be able to not just produce products, but also sell them. And they looked at that alongside inventory, which is what are you doing or what products do you have that you intend to sell, and then what operational expenses you have, like how much is it costing to produce those things that you want to sell. But again, with the systems thinking approach, you can't just do one of those. You have to look at all three and make sure all three are working, right? You want to produce the inventory at operational expenses that are lower than it costs to produce it, but then also drive it through the system, create that throughput, sell the product. Because otherwise you're just creating a bunch of products that are sitting somewhere in a factory or in a warehouse.
And even though this book was written for a plant, I found the concepts could apply to any business. What would you say to that?
I agree. I was definitely looking at it from a service business approach because like we both work with Redirect Health, which provides services. And in terms of the inventory, I would say inventory / services, because instead of inventory that's stocking up in a warehouse, you have people, you have labor that are providing the service, and you might have too many people or something like that that's costing more than it should. Too much capacity, basically.
Right. And I think that within any business, people do lose focus of the goal. They lose focus that, hey, we're here to make money. And I think at times people shy away from saying, hey, we got to make money, right? Because there's this thought of, well, then people want, to say, well, then I need to be paid more, or you need to hire more people, or you need to do this because all you're greedy and you just want to make money. In private business, I think you struggle with that because you're struggling with the concept of I need to make money so the business can thrive. But then you always have this like people in your ear that, well, if you're making money, you should give it back to everybody else. But then you stop making money, so the company can't survive, right? What do you think is the challenge with being more open? So with companies being more open that, hey, they can have a mission, a purpose, or whatever, but really the goal is we got to make money. Why isn't that talked about more, you think?
Yeah, it definitely is looked at with a negative light just to make money if you leave it at that. And that's just to do, no one really wants to just stack a bunch of paper somewhere, right? It's really about the meaning behind it. I think about it like you want to have a value-based business. You want to provide value. And the best indicator of that, if you're providing value to the marketplace, is that they make the decision to buy your product or service, and therefore you get money. So it's just an indicator of your company providing value. That's how I look at it, and maybe that's how it needs to be talked about more. It's more about making money because it means that we're creating value in the world.
Yeah, it means people like the product, or the business idea means you're onto something, right? So it doesn't have to be a negative,
Yeah.
and it means the business can continue. Businesses not making money don't survive. So.
Businesses that aren't making money aren't creating more value than the cost that they're putting into the business. So
Yep.
that's also a great indicator. It's great feedback that you need to either make a change or people aren't finding it valuable enough to invest in it.
Right. So in the book, you find Alex struggling to figure out how to what to do next. And in the story, he connects to an old person they knew, Jonah, and Jonah starts giving him a lot of these things in his head, right? So he's who challenges him on what the goal is and gets in his next steps. And in that learning process, he goes on a camping trip with his son because his son's in the Scouts and he forgets and he has to go on the camping trip. Describe what he learns on this camping trip.
Yeah. So
and the Herbie effect.
So he's talking to Jonah, the perfect archetype of a mentor. He calls Jonah up whenever he has a question or to learn about what he should be doing. So he was finding that some of the bottlenecks in his company were that their goal originally and their KPIs were efficiencies. They were looking to create their product at a lower cost and to create more of it with the resources that they were given, even at the expense of the products were stacking up in a warehouse. They weren't creating that throughput. They weren't selling the products. They were just creating more carrying costs. So they go on this camping trip, and he sort of makes a metaphor between the factory and the camping trip when the kids and the adults, they decided to go on a hike, go to the top of the mountain, and without being told what the goal was, everyone just assumed it was to get to the top, and that's what everyone tried to do. Some people were faster, some kids were slower, some kids were carrying more or less weight in their backpack or different shoes, that type of stuff. So Alex uses the opportunity to see if he can lead a team into driving them toward the goal, which he defined the goal as getting to the top of the mountain together as a team at the same time. And so at first, the kids were all over the place, scrambling. The fastest kid was at the front, the slowest was at the back, and he was straggling behind. And he tried a couple of different approaches. First, it was lining up the kids together and asking them to stay together. Didn't work for too long. And then he had them hold hands. Maybe that would help them stick together longer. But really, it just created everyone in the line was just going at the slowest pace of the slowest kid because he was holding them behind. So then he tried to think differently and change it up by having the slowest kid go to the front and lead the pack. And then he, instead of coming up with a solution, he challenged his team, the kids, to come up with a way that if they wanted to get there faster, they needed to help speed up Herbie, the slowest kid. So what one of the kids suggested was, hey, Herbie, what do you have in your backpack? And once they opened up his backpack, they realized he was carrying so much weight, like a extra stovetop and a bunch of extra things, extra snacks, extra drinks that were just slowing him down because he didn't know what the goal was. He didn't know what he was planning for on the trip. So they took all of his items, they distributed it among the rest, with most of it going to Alex, one of the adults that could lift more. And they found that really sped up Herbie, the slowest kid, and they were able to get there faster, and there was less complaints among the kids going slow. And they had fun with it. They had fun identifying the problem, seeking the challenge, solving it, and then getting to the top together.
Yeah. So the Herbie effect, essentially, what he realized was as Herbie or any person is slower than the person ahead of him, there was this constant gap being built between the people hiking, and then it would be caught up because somebody would have to run and catch up, and then it would slow down and then catch up, and then he just had these huge gaps happening. But if he reversed it and put the slowest person ahead and then put the fastest person towards the back, the gap stayed tighter because they're all constantly pushing on the people ahead of them. And now the slowest person, what do we do to make them faster? Because now we're all invested in this one constraint, and how do we make it better, right?
Yes.
So that started the process to get into the theory of constraints, which is the last big part of the book. Can you describe the theory of constraints that then that moves into in the story?
Yeah, one part I would add is that with the boys hiking, each kid could be looked at as like a component of the system, and the whole system was driving toward a goal of everyone getting to the top. So even though one component is performing really well, it's really efficient, there are other components that weren't performing as well, and that was the constraint in that system. So in this case, Herbie, the slowest kid, was the constraint, and being able to focus on that constraint on Herbie and making him faster made the whole system work better. Whereas just having one kid that was really fast and could get to the top faster actually made the whole system worse, because the goal was for everyone to get there at the same time. That's the best way I can describe the theory of constraints, is you're looking for the bottleneck, the weakest link in the chain that is holding back the system from the goal. And you're focused on that, solving that problem, whatever it may be. For Alex, it was originally, there was only two machines that could produce one of the parts in that factory, and there was only two people that could operate those machines. That there were the only two that were trained. So that was the first thing they looked at, and they found that during lunch the machines were being turned off, and then obviously at nighttime they were being turned off. So the first focus was to train people that could use that machine, keep the machines running through lunch by staggering the shifts. And that was one way that they solved that bottleneck, but also they saw that the quality control of the products was happening after that machine, after those two machines that were the bottleneck, and products were being thrown away because of bad quality after that machine. So they moved the quality control to occur before those two machines, and so they weren't using the capacity of those machines on products that were going to get thrown away anyway. And so by solving that constraint, they improved the productivity of the system as defined by increasing throughput, increasing sales, making more money, and then they were able to move on to the next constraint, because something else is then gonna pop up.
Well, and you can never get rid of a bottleneck, right? You're always going to have bottlenecks, but it's identifying so that you understand and can work through it and be productive. The piece that matters, or what I'm going to say matters, is throughput matters. And so even fixing the bottleneck, okay, so you can fix a bottleneck, you can make production move faster, and you could produce stuff quicker, faster, better, and have a stack of inventory that's doing nothing for you. That's throughput. Yeah. But throughput that matters would be, I'm creating throughput and there's no inventory because it's right out the door and it's selling. And that's the piece that I believe companies miss at times, especially with other departments. You could have a marketing department that produces 200 leads. We're doing amazing. We're creating throughput for you. We've got all these leads, but none of them are closing and selling. Well, that doesn't matter, because we're not actually creating sales that grows the business. Or an operations team can say, we have the best customer service score. We're amazing. But nobody cares about that part of the product, and sales aren't happening.
Yeah.
So you're not making money, right?
Yeah.
Or you're spending a ton of money on systems to have the best customer service out there that's not really helping you create money, right? So again, it comes back to the throughput that matters that creates the cash, right? So one piece that I want to get on before we start to just wrap up with any summaries is there was a tone within the book, because during this time, robots were starting to come into factories and people were worried, well, they take jobs and they're going to do things. And so in this scenario, they bought these expensive robots, and the team, because they knew the company was so focused on the robots, made sure the robots met the quotas that they should meet. So they constantly had the robots working and producing, so that if you were to just inspect a report and say, hey, how much product is your robots making? They'd be able to say they're making this much product. They're like, wow, they're the most efficient system within all of our factories, these robots, because they can produce so much and so fast. But what was happening is they were just doing it because they were told that was the important piece of the company. The company thought, what are the efficiencies of the robots? We need to know, right?
Yeah.
So now come to our times. I can see this happening with software, with AI, with other things right now, where people go, hey, I'm excited I have AI. Yeah, this is all the things we're doing with it. I've created this process. I've done this thing with AI. I've done this with AI. And then you go, okay, but what cash are you making from any of that? And they can't give you an answer. So I'm finding that's happening right now. It's the new thing.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to figure out how to put it in their company, but nobody's saying, how does it create throughput that matters? I mean, when you hear that, what do you see out there right now around AI? And do you see that similarities, or do you see other things on how that could tie to this story with the robots?
Yeah, I see sort of an irony between it's creating a lot of efficiencies and people are, like the psychology behind it, people are fearful that it may mean less work, less jobs later on. But at the same time, sometimes there's no goal defined. And so it's just creating efficiencies that actually lead to less jobs because, like in this case that you were describing with the machines, they were producing so much product that they were sitting in the warehouse and the carrying costs were making the factory not profitable. And so it was going to lead to the factory closing 3 months later because of those efficiencies. Whereas what should have happened is not only would those machines create more, but they would have looked at the bottlenecks that were happening. Like in this case, once they started getting productive, they weren't getting enough marketing and sales after that because they were being so operationally efficient that sales was the bottleneck. And so what Alex did was he went to their boss, to the director of marketing, and asked him for more leads.
Right.
And not only did he ask for more leads, but he was able to use the new improvements in speed and quality to make the deliveries more reliable, which the customers loved. The clients raved about it. And so he was actually able to turn a weakness, the bottlenecks, into a strength, a selling strength, and create more sales from that.
Right. And again, that's where any new thing or anything you want to bring into your company, you got to look at it as what's it going to do to create cash, right? Not just make my company the next big thing and so excited because they had a board member that wanted to fly in and take a picture next to the robots because they're so efficient.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with, but is it creating cash? So I think that's a good key lesson to think about. Anything you institute in your business, how does it create throughput that matters?
Yes. And something else it reminded me of was when they were instituting the changes, once they were able to get those two machines to not be bottlenecks, it required them to create a new communication system because they were used to just working whatever was available at the time. If product came in, they would just work that. Even if there was a demand for it or not, they would take that to the next step and move that through the assembly line. Whereas after they had created some efficiencies, they started looking at it like, well, we need to prioritize the shipments that are already late, 4 weeks late, 8 weeks late, and work those first. So they created a system, and they were able to, first of all, with the improvements they were making with the bottlenecks, they were able to target the shipments that were late. And so they used a coloring system, blue, red, green, to indicate which one was more important or urgent. And then they also used a numbering system along with that to indicate which one was the most tardy and needed to be worked first so that it could be shipped out. So solving some of the bottlenecks made it so that they had to develop other new parts to the system that would communicate the changes and communicate what was important to work. And so I thought that was a great representation of systems thinking because there's always one change isn't going to happen in isolation. It's always linked to something else, and so something else has to change, and then that causes something else to need to change. And so I thought that was super important.
It is, and again, it goes back to: are you defining the goal for each piece within the system, right? And is the goal aligned to making money? Because if the goal is for this one section of the process, the system, I'm going to outproduce everybody else. Well, what is that doing down the line to help with actually making money? And that was a key piece in this of how he aligned each and every part of the system so that it adds up to the overall goal.
Yeah, and then the psychology was so important, like being able to. There was a resistance to the change at first because the processes, the manuals said one thing, and the plant technically was performing great according to those processes and to their measuring systems. But once he redefined the goal and was trying to make the company profitable, he had to sort of do things that weren't in line with the processes. And so that involved a little bit of stress on behalf of the employees because they weren't following the right way to measure things and the right way to perform things and to perform jobs. But he was able to recruit the team and get them aligned to that goal. And then once they were able to show the better results, they were able to actually change the processes, and not just change them for their plant, but change them for the whole company, change them for other plants, and make the whole company more successful.
Yep. So I won't give away the ending because, people need to, go through the story. But any last words or things that you'd like to add that we didn't cover on the goal today?
Yeah, I would say that once they started solving bottlenecks and improving the efficiencies of the company, Alex was, back to the personal side, he was talking with his wife about how all of the changes seemed like common sense, and they couldn't figure out, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I change that before? It's so obvious that the goal should have been for the company to be profitable, and we should all be driving toward that direction, which would mean solving the obstacles that are holding us back from that. And so it really comes back to how important those incentives are to get people rowing in the right direction. And it also led him to think about how he would maintain that change, because before they weren't operating well at all and they were able to change it. But how did he know that those changes would maintain and exist in the future, especially, in a world where business has turnover or they have growth and you need to hire new employees, and those employees might bring in a different mindset from other companies. And so he learned that the right question, the right things that he should be learning from his mentor, Jonah, were how to create change, how to create new incentives, and also how to teach those to the managers and to the other people in the company so that it creates a culture of improvement and of change and of system thinking so that it could be maintained throughout time. Yeah. Even when, there's a completely different set of people operating that plant.
Well, awesome. Well, The Goal is a book that's been around for, 20, 30 years and is continually been a book that I think anybody should go back and read. Might be one of those you reread every 5 to 10 years just to remind yourself some of the things you might pick up in it. I really enjoyed the book. One thing I will say that I learned is you should never ask your wife what the goal of your marriage is, which is part in the story. Yep. If you would ask, your team, what's the goal of our company? That's one thing. But when you go home to your wife and you say, what's the goal of our marriage? You might get some you might get some different responses there. So be careful if you take that advice out of this book. So John, thanks for joining the Optimistic American today and discussing the goal.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening or watching the Optimistic American podcast on our book club. This book was The Goal, and really enjoyed reading it. I actually, when I say read it, I listen to it because I'm telling you, it really is powerful as you listen to it with the sounds. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to the podcast, and join our book club where you can follow us for future readings and see what we take out of those books. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.